The other question that we get asked a lot is educational attainment. The one thing that we've seen is that we've had a growth since 2000 in the share of the population that has a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, and a doctorate degree, and also the no schooling completed.
How does that happen?
Well, looking at that data, I think it must be the foreign-born population because a lot of people might have attained education in another country, but I suspect when they answer the census, they're not going to say, I attended elementary school here, even though they might have in another country. So I think that's probably what that represents. So interestingly, just looking at the educational attainment, compared to other jurisdictions, we have the highest share of the population with a master's and professional. And doctorate actually is Montgomery County. But we're up there. It's 3.8% of the population has a doctorate. And this is just some transportation data. This is average weekly passenger boardings every May of every year from 1980 to 2007. And one of the things that you see looking over time is that there's been a gradual uptick in those average boardings. So this is all historical data. Right now, the average boardings are about 98,281 for the month of May.
Is that just metro or bus?
Just metro. Just to see, looking at this historically by the metro station areas, in the RB corridor, we've seen considerable growth in Virginia Square, percentage-wise, 67%. But in terms of real numbers, Roslyn has seen the biggest boarding and exits change. In the JD corridor, both percentage-wise and real numbers, that's Pentagon City that's seen the biggest change in ridership. But right now, I just put that in to emphasize the fact that with higher oil prices are coming changes in how people commute to work. When you look at the sort of more recent data, right now I compared the average boardings for the metro station areas, for the metro stations, from January to April. From 2007 to 2008, almost every station in Arlington has seen growth, except for Reagan National. The biggest change was in Roslyn, that hub, for so many lines. And the other interesting thing is I was looking at, on this chart, sort of at the boardings and exits, sort of taking a longer view, so going back to '06. So here, I'll just do a comparison of January to April of '06, '07, and '08. So that you can see how much those boardings have grown, so boardings and exits. If you look at the right-hand side, at the '08 number, that first point, that's the average boardings for January, and you can see that they're higher than the boardings for January '07 and the January '06. And same is true for February of '08. If you look at that second dot, it's bigger than the second dot for which represents February '07. And it's actually closer to travel, use of the metro in April.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things kind of behind the demographics in terms of construction, because the development and where the folks that live in Arlington and what kind of unit they live in and when it was built definitely plays into a lot of the demographics that Robert was talking about. So we'll talk about that, and then also some of the office development as it relates to employment, and then finally finish up with our forecasts. The recent decade, or the current decade, has been one of the strongest as far as construction of new units since the 60s, which is when we really started tracking development units in the county. So you can see total number of units over 14,000 is in excess of the 1960s, and we're not quite done with the decade. So development has certainly slowed down yet, but we're not done with the decade. Just looking at about 10 years of data in terms of percentage of what type of unit is built, definitely multifamily housing, that's probably readily apparent. Multifamily housing is certainly the leading housing type, but there still is some background construction and infill of single family and some other housing types. So just looking at this chart, you can see for years where the multifamily numbers may have declined a little bit, you can see that single family takes a center stage a little bit more like in '04.
Is that overall inventory, or is that just construction for that year each?
That's construction for each year, yeah.
Why was there such a huge jump in 2004 in construction of single family?
This is a little bit of a confusing chart. It's percentage of the total number of units, so it's not necessarily that there was a jump, although from one year to the next the number can vary quite widely. There are probably about a couple hundred units maybe under construction now, but a lot of those have are tied with demolitions. Depending on when those demolitions are, you can end up with a lot of new single-family units in one year versus the next.
That was probably time when they were really tearing down and building new
Right.
houses.
Right,
That
right.
was probably ahead of it.
Right.
And then the interest rates were really low and all the remodeling was. And then if you had a slowdown in some high-rise units, then that would have bumped up the percentages.
Right. We still are, multifamily does comprise the bulk of the housing units, and that hasn't changed all that much since '08, although it does continue to increase, and the number of single-family units as a percentage of the total, this is the total housing stock now, declines slightly, so it's just over a quarter of the housing units.
Do you get to a point of who is living in the multifamily units? Is it families or is it 1 and 2 person family? You know what I mean? Do you go into that too?
We don't have information on that in terms of who lives in the units in these slides today, but
Okay.
the average household size is something that we have information on, we have data on. And it is typically distinctly lower than single-family units, so it's on average less than 2 per household in multifamily units. It varies depending on where you are in the county. In terms of residential development, again, as Robert was saying, population change isn't consistent throughout the county, so there are some areas that have had a lot more construction and development than others. Clarendon and Virginia Square, namely, in the past decade or in the current decade. So Clarendon is the leader in terms of percent of new units, and Virginia Square has the title for the total number of new units. This is a diagram that kind of helps you understand a little bit of the relationship between net new units and population. So there is a little bit of a population lag. If we look at here in 2000, you can see the number of completed units, maybe around 600, 700, but there were nearly 1,000 units demolished. And so the following year, there was a net population loss. But then a boom in '01 and '02 kind of led to population gains. And that's sort of what's happened here. And more recently, in '07, quite a lot of construction compared to demolitions. And so the population increased by about 2% compared to the previous year.
You ever look at the population change based on like economics, like income or the general economy? Such an expensive place to live. I would wonder if that, aside from housing, like economics would drive the population of it, wouldn't it?
I'm sure that economics has a role, and I think that will be continued to play out in the next few years. I think we'll see probably a change in the types of housing units that are built.
Do you track that? Like, would you be able to come back next year and say we have a decrease based on annual incomes went down and now population went down?
We haven't looked at it like that, no. But we could. Probably the real driver is the type of unit, and I guess what I'm getting at is that we've had a lot of replacement of garden apartment units, which tend to be tied to more affordable rents or mortgages, and replacement with some higher end townhouses and multifamily units. So it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing, I think. There is certainly also a lot of construction of commercial development, and that's been pretty strong in the past decade. And there are a couple of projects typically will push the numbers way up for a certain year. So '07 and '03 were particularly high numbers for office, but it's been pretty strong. Over 200,000 square feet completed each year since '98. And retail tends to be a bit more sporadic. So our total estimate for office space in the county now is over 43 million. This is a big chart, but just wanted to look at the number of square feet and where they are in the county. Again, it's not consistent. Virginia Square and Ballston kind of take the lead here in terms of office square feet completed, both over 1 million. Crystal City also has had some large buildings, as well as Roslyn. But Ballston really has been the leader since 2000.